Hey there, welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and I know I said my next video would be a discussion about police and prison abolition, but that's going to take more research to do it well, and I needed a palate cleanser from all the police shit. So instead, I'd like to do a little mini episode because I want to talk about the series Cobra Kai and how it reminded me of a book by shame researcher Brené Brown. This video contains very minor mid-season spoilers for Cobra Kai and very major thematic spoilers for Brené Brown's book Rising Strong, but you don't have to be familiar with either to get something out of this. The premise of Cobra Kai is that it takes place 34 years after the events of the original Karate Kid movie. Danny LaRusso has grown up to own a successful luxury car dealership, and Johnny Lawrence has grown up to be a drunken dirtbag stuck in the 80s. This time, Johnny is the protagonist, and we watch him try to reclaim his dignity by reopening the Cobra Kai karate dojo that turned him into a bully in the original movies. Danny, the victim of that Cobra Kai bullying, is understandably disturbed and becomes fixated on preventing Johnny from bringing bully karate back to the San Fernando Valley. Throughout the show, Johnny and Danny have encounters with each other and with friends and loved ones, where they explain their motivations and their versions of history. The show does something really brilliant. It shows how both Danny and Johnny are operating off of their own stories about the past, and how their stories are neither totally inaccurate nor wholly complete. I mean, we know Danny's perspective. Johnny Lawrence bullied him in high school and tried to injure him in a karate competition at the behest of his evil sensei. In Cobra Kai, we see that Johnny was emotionally abused at home, and that Cobra Kai was the only place to afford him a sense of dignity and agency. From Johnny's perspective, Danny stole his first true love away from him and embarrassed him in front of the entire school. We realize that scenes of Danny giving Johnny his comeuppance in the Karate Kid film, from Johnny's perspective, are scenes in which Johnny was antagonized by the guy that moved in on his girlfriend. Beyond Danny and Johnny's conflict, the show also focuses on the new kids at Cobra Kai. Almost without exception, they were bullied, abused, and rejected by their peers. As they train, they become tough, confident, even popular. And they themselves begin to turn into bullies to varying degrees, but generally in a realistic and even occasionally sympathetic way. Every step of the way, the series shows us how, from their perspective, they're protecting themselves and taking back the dignity that was stripped from them. We see how life in modern high schools revolves around being seen, being filmed by your peers. So isn't it safer to be seen as dangerous rather than docile? Nearly every conflict in Cobra Kai feels realistic, emotionally weighty, and, from our perspective as the audience, fairly solvable. We on the outside realize that almost every interpersonal conflict is something that arises because two parties are operating off of different versions of a story and assuming the other person is also operating from that story. For example, if only Johnny would tell Danny that his new Cobra Kai is meant to be against bullying and cheating, and instead about helping people find their voice and their confidence. But instead, our characters double down on their own stories to the detriment of their relationships. It strongly reminds me of a concept Brené Brown discusses in her book Rising Strong, the idea that we tell ourselves fast, satisfying stories about conflicts that aren't always totally accurate. I'll let her explain, and let's see if I can avoid angering the copyright police.
Really, the heart of this book is about these really dangerous stories we make up when we're in the midst of struggle, when we're in a fall. We are neurobiologically hardwired to make sense of that fall, to make sense of our hurt as fast as we can. And if we can come up with a story that makes sense of it, our brain chemically rewards us for that story, whether it's accurate or not. We all do it. I mean, if you and I finish this interview and we walk down the hill, and I say, thanks a lot, Oprah, I really appreciate it, and you go like this, my brain takes that as anxiety or fear and I immediately make up a story. I knew she never liked me. That Super Soul Sunday really sucked. I didn't do the right thing. It was terrible. And then all of a sudden, I'm working up a whole narrative. How I treat you the next time I see you is off that narrative.
Wow.
And then, it just keeps going and going.
Again and again in Cobra Kai, we see the stories the characters are telling themselves. Stories in which they are the heroes. Stories in which they have been wronged. And I think that's why I respond to the show so much, because it's something that all of us do. Think back to people you've been in or currently are in conflict with. Think of the story you're telling yourself about that conflict. Your story might very well be true, but it's important to remember that the other person is probably telling themselves a story in which they are justified and maybe even the victims. Now, this is not to say that you have to agree with their version of the story. They could be completely wrong and wildly self-serving. But in order to navigate the conflict productively, you have to acknowledge that a counter-narrative does exist. And you have to accept that your story is one they might not believe in yet. So what's the answer? Well, here's step 1 from Brene again.
The first thing I have to do is when you look at me like that and I feel something in response to it, I have to acknowledge, a button's been pushed.
Yeah.
I've been hooked on something emotional is happening here. I'm responding. And then I have to be willing to get curious about what it is. So instead of immediately going to my crazy story, I have to go to, okay, I'm emotionally hooked around something. I don't know what just happened, but I'm feeling like stressed out about it, or it hurt my feelings or something, and I need to figure out more.
Step 2, for me anyway, is to try to imagine the other person's story and to anticipate their motivation. One way you can do this is by using your imagination and saying, how would I have to rewrite my story to make them the hero or the victim instead of me? This is the big problem for the characters in Cobra Kai, and I would say particularly for Danny LaRusso. He's so used to being the underdog hero that he has a completely atrophied ability to see how people he doesn't like could have valid reasons for doing the things that they do. So much of the conflict in the show could be solved by Danny treating Johnny like a fully realized human being and having a long conversation about why the new Cobra Kai is different from the old one. Obviously, this doesn't make for great television, and that's fine because I think the conflict in the show is extremely instructive. It's a show where almost everyone has a valid point, and one where the audience is forced to reckon with a world in which protagonists and their antagonists are coming from valid places of hurt, fear, and a need for belonging and acceptance. It's a world in which the victims of bullying can recreate that violence against others, and in which former bullies deserve to have their dignity restored so they can thrive again. And guess what? That's the world we live in. Hurt people, and people who've hurt people deserve a shot at redemption. This doesn't mean it's easy, far from it. It also doesn't mean that you personally need to be ready to let people back into your life anytime they flare back up. People who've perpetrated lots of trauma on others don't get to set the reintegration agenda, and the victims of that trauma may never be able to fully forgive them or let their guard down, and that's valid. What it does mean, for me anyway, is that I need to do a better job of understanding the stories I'm telling myself about people, and I need to get curious about other people's stories. I would say this is particularly relevant for those of us doing social justice work, abolition work, economic and climate justice work, and other kinds of leftist projects, because interpersonal and internecine conflicts frequently interfere with our ability to fight for others. Those of us who affirm collective action over rugged individualism have all the more reason to be diligent students of stories other than our own. So, what's a story you've told yourself about someone else that turned out to be incomplete? Or is there a time in your life someone was telling a story about you to themselves that was completely off base? Tell us about it in the comments. Please like and subscribe and jingle the jangle if you enjoyed this video, and I promise I'll finish my police abolition triptych next time. Thanks for watching, and good night.